Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Justin, I'm your host. There are a couple things I'd like to mention today before introducing today's speaker. Just want to forward these slides really quick. Great. So keep in mind your microphones are muted, so be sure to use the questions section on your screen to enter all of your questions. We do encourage you to ask all the questions that you want. If we don't get around to answering your question during the broadcast, we will follow up with you individually. So today's webinar is being recorded, and we will email that to you following the event so you can share that with your friends, teams, and colleagues within your organization. I do want to point out that we have some other upcoming webinars that might be of interest to you. So if you received an email for today's webinar, we will email you for these as well. So keep an eye out for those. So moving on to today's speaker. Today's speaker is Bob Bobble. He's the founder and CEO of Cayosoft. So following 10 years of driving AD management and identity management solutions for Quest Software, Bob and a team of former colleagues founded Cayosoft in 2013. So Cayosoft was founded with the idea to create the next generation of management software for hybrid and cloud platforms. So welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
My audio good? I
yeah,
think
you
I'm
sound good.
sharing my screen. Everything's good? Good. Thanks for that lovely introduction, Justin. I know you just had to read the slide, but hey, it's, worth the time. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, everybody, thanks for taking time out of your busy day. I know things get a little tight and hectic the week before a holiday week, especially here in the US. We have our Thanksgiving break next week. But before we begin talking about how we help solve the challenges around Microsoft Office and Azure licensing, I just wanted to go through a couple of bullet points that describe some of the major problems people are having. And then I'll talk a little bit about the way people solve those, and then we'll show you how we can help you solve those. So the first thing that I would just mention is that, I guess the bullet point says that licensing is constantly changing and complex. One of the reasons it's so difficult for people is because in the old days, pre-2014, prior to Microsoft going online with a lot of their solutions, you really didn't have to deal with licensing that much. I mean, it was sort of a once-a-year event. You got a nice piece of paper with a shiny holographic foil image on it, and occasionally the products would ask you to put in a key. On the Office licensing piece, you often had to put in a key, so I guess that isn't too different. But you didn't have to select and deselect a lot of options unless you're doing that through installation. And so now, in order to assign a license, you can just assign the top level license, but there are so many options and sub options and interdependent licenses and interdependent options that it becomes very difficult to keep track of all of that. We at Cayosoft have spent years understanding the Microsoft licensing model and its capabilities. And so that's what qualifies us to deliver these types of presentations, to walk you through some of the complexities and then show you how we go about solving them. And we'll talk about how other people solve them as well. So now you have to deal with licensing on a per user basis. So as you go through and you start assigning licenses, you have all these checkboxes which represent options. I'm going to sort of start with the last item first. A lot of our customers, before they come to us, are just use what we call a generic assignment. And what that means is they just, they're happy to get to Office. They're going to meet their requirements. So they just buy E5s and they give them to everybody, or they just buy E3s and give them to everyone. Occasionally we'll see people who will buy a bunch of like E1s and then wait till people ask for additional components. But honestly, it's better it's more likely we see them buy like an E3 license, which includes Office and email, rather than just the E1s. Because of that fact, people combine their Office purchase with their mailbox service from Microsoft. The problem with that approach is that you're often over licensing people, which means additional costs. So you may be, if you're on a month to month, that's not too bad. A lot of people are going that direction. But if you're on an annual basis trying to save that percentage, then you probably are spending too much. And at the end of that year, you might want to know, where can we economize on this? My budget's been chewed up by all these generic licenses we have assigned, and now I have other projects. I want to move a SQL Server workload to the cloud, or I want to start using other pieces of Microsoft's cloud, or maybe somebody else's cloud entirely, and my budget's chewed up with licenses that are barely being used in some cases. And so that's one of the big drawbacks to sort of using generic licensing. It doesn't granularly look in a granular fashion at users, so you're often paying more than you need to. The other issue that you can run into is that it may be hard to support all those sub options, right? So then you're trying to come up with a standard license, and then you have to tell whoever's adding and removing people, hey, by the way, don't check these 7 check boxes, skip these 2, and then add the last 3. Crazy, kind of a crazy way to do it. And also some of those applications, we've had a lot of customers come to us say, hey, I can't give people these applications because we haven't spent enough time analyzing if there's a data exfiltration problem. So for example, you may not give people Yammer because there may be some way that they can share data that you don't understand, and then that could be sensitive data, for example. Same with Teams. People tend to just open up Teams and let it go, not realizing that there's probably ways people are sharing data that are inappropriate for your legal or regulatory compliance requirements. So what makes licensing so difficult just to manage? Well, native tools don't align to your business, first of all. So it's kind of like you see everybody and you now have to go in one by one and assign licenses, or you have to pay a lot of extra money and do these what we call GBL license assignments. And there's some issues there as well we'll chat about. But it doesn't understand along the line of business, which means I can't just give my accounting or my engineering department or my marketing group their ability just to license their own set of users and maintain those. You know, let the manager figure out or help figure out, or the local IT, what we used to call an OU admin, the local administrator, help them figure that out. It just doesn't exist that way. There's no way to divvy up licenses, and there's no way to delegate a certain set of users against a certain set of administrators. So there's no concept of an administrative scoped environment there yet. A lot of times native assignments or the out-of-the-box assignments that are left up to help desk or admins are just done in mistake or made in mistake. And so there are options, since there's no way to enforce what check boxes are checked or not checked, oftentimes people are either over licensed or under licensed, which means new help desk calls, or worse, data exfiltration or breaches. And so you have to be careful of that. You have to really train people about the licensing model. But those manual mistakes people cause often result in the end user having some sort of downtime, having to issue new support help desk tickets. Average help desk tickets like $25 per call now or per ticket. Mileage may vary there. It could be as low as $10, but they all cost something. And there's a potential data loss from incorrect licensing. And if you look over to the right, if you're giving somebody, a day-to-day administrator or help desk person license assignment responsibility, they're going to have to understand all those licenses. And this is just a small list, one that I grabbed off of a demo tenant. This is what the licenses look like in the Office tenant. And the interesting part about that is that when you retire licenses, they often stay there and they're still seen and visible. And when you do things like, Microsoft just created a new line of licenses called Microsoft 365 E5 licenses. Well, they already had an Office 365 E5 license. And so it gets to be really, really, really confusing for people. No wonder mistakes are made and data is lost. So you have to be careful there and train those people very well, or you have to find some other solution to that problem, like Cayosoft. There's nothing inherent in reclaiming licenses. Microsoft did make a huge step forward in that area. If you go to delete a user now in the native tool, it'll ask you, do you want to revoke the license, which is huge. But most people really aren't provisioning and deprovisioning manually that way. So now you have to look for alternatives. And the PowerShell commands they give you don't really do license recapturing. Plus, there's a lot of things that may just naturally have had licenses assigned to them. But for some reason, when that object was created, somebody assigned a license and it didn't need one. So we actually have a question, pretty simple question. Do shared mailboxes require a license? That's a good question. The answer is technically no. There are some things within the Microsoft licensing agreement that you probably have that say, hey, by the way, If that mailbox is going to be one that you put litigation hold on, you should have a license on it. But in general, there's no physical requirement to have a license on that mailbox. And not only do people have the ability to assign licenses to those mailboxes when not required, then there are other issues that can come up as well. I think Joe, from one of our customers who's joining, mentioned that if you have a 50 gigabytes or larger mailbox, you have to add a license so that you get that additional space. So good call there, Joe. Thanks for that addition. Yeah, and disabling and deleting users, you may have a bunch of users that you're disabling because you're not ready to delete them. Those licenses don't get deleted. When you do revoke a license, there's metadata that is lost. And so we constantly are getting calls from customers, from prospects saying, hey, we had this outage. We accidentally deleted a user, pulled them out of the recycle bin, but then there's all this data is missing and we don't know how to reconstruct it. So a lot of the outages that we see come from scripts. This is a common script that I present at in all of our webinars because it's such a perfect example. This was a script that a customer came to us or prospect came to us, eventually became a customer and said, hey, we need to replace this. My scripting guy either died, retired, or was fired. I can't remember what it was, but they left, and that was the user onboarding script. It didn't offboard, didn't clean up licenses. It was just onboarding. And the problem was all the licenses were hard-coded in there, so as license names changed or additional ones were added, they were editing the script. So whenever the business logic changed, they edited the script. Anytime there was something new that happened in terms of some new feature that needed to be pre-provisioned, they had to change the script, and they didn't have a scripting person any longer. And so that was a kind of a difficult situation for them to find themselves in. So what we did is, just to make it a little obvious, we did a single space copy of that. There is still some space where they have, the opening and closing brackets in their script. Was not a bad script, just would fail frequently because of the changes in business data. But we made it 10 points, so it's really small text, single spaced it, and threw it on a bunch of Word pages, and it turned out it was about 19 pages. So this is just to get some basic onboarding with a license, just to get the person on and started. This did not do anything to configure the person's account at all. So none of the teams were added, none of the mailbox settings were added, none of the options in the licensing were pre-provisioned. So basically people were going through a pretty raw experience when they first logged in. So why not use these scripts? If you have a scripter, you could do this. And there are lots and lots of examples, and we point people to the PowerShell gallery for this. Well, there is one issue with this. Scripts are the #1 issue that we see causing problems in our prospect and customer environments. There was a study done by a website called 4sysops, and they did a survey, and they found that 65% of the administrators that they surveyed didn't have the time or the background knowledge to build, let alone maintain, complex scripts. So that's more than half of the administrators out there, because people are asked to do a lot more than they used to be with the same amount of time, right? So, hey, if I can build this script, that solves one problem out of the 100 I have. Oftentimes, that's why we see people coming to us, because it's just simpler. Not that we do everything, but again, we probably do 30 or 40 things that you don't have to have a script for. So why are scripts also sort of sensitive to this? Well, here's an example of what happens, especially around licensing. This is very common. We see this pretty consistently. And the story sort of goes this way every time we hear it. Effectively, the way Microsoft scripts assigning licenses works perfectly if you're assigning a brand new license, but when you're updating an existing license, or if you're changing things, it causes problems. So PowerShell admin goes on holiday, but right before they leave, they run a script that updates and assigns licenses properly. That evening, late on Friday, Microsoft adds something to your tenant, a new license or a new option, which has a new dependency applied to it, or they just assign a license and enable it for everybody, and now that has some weird dependency with their existing licenses. So Saturday, that scheduled script runs and tries to do the correct order of operation, which is revoke the existing license and then reapply an updated license. Again, that's one way they prevent people from doubling up on licenses for a single user. But because of that new dependency that was added on Friday, the script breaks and the reassignment fails, which means now you have a user that's unlicensed. So suddenly you get a user calling the help desk saying, hey, I can't get access to my mailbox, or I can't, my teams are all gone, or whatever it might be. So help desk goes and relicenses that user manually to get them started, and then the phone calls start coming in, right? A couple hundred users, 1,000 users, whatever it is were impacted are going to start to call. Well, they go through that ugly process of reassigning those licenses, but what they don't realize is that all the metadata on things like the mailbox and some metadata in Teams is lost when that user license is reassigned. They're going to lose some of that metadata. So Monday, the user calls back in and says, hey, I can access my mailbox now, but my assistant no longer has access to my calendar, or my out of offices are broken and I'm traveling. I need somebody to put the out of office back on. So help desk starts to look at the 150, 200, 300, 500, or 1,000 calls they got about that failed license. The admin's still on vacation, or he's trying to remote in to figure out what's going on. But at this point, it's too late. They not only had the outage, but they've lost the metadata. And so the help desk tries to reconstruct that lost metadata by going through old tickets or trying to run reports and figure out, all right, who had security on the mailbox, who was out of office enabled. It just gets ugly. So that's one simple example of how outages can occur. Errant scripts, malicious users, those types of things are very common. Again, this is one of the reasons we do what we do. So let's talk a little bit about license management, and then we're going to talk a little bit about license optimization. And then in about 5 minutes, I'm going to jump over and show you a little bit about our license management. 3 quick demos, nothing extraordinary. Well, the last one may be pretty extraordinary, but it's just because we have some new capability that we're putting out shortly. But let's talk about license management first. Native tools, they do let you manage licenses. But there's no support for hybrid. So if you're still managing from Active Directory, you're syncing up to the cloud, there's no way to grab an Active Directory user or a group in AD and use that to assign your licenses. They just don't support it. And no one else that I know of supports that. So there's a limitation for Cayosoft competitors and for native tools. We just don't see that as something people have added, yet that's one of the most popular features we have. Admin delegation is usually an all or nothing proposition. Within native tools, you have license administrators and you have everyone else. And so you can't develop licensing scopes. So, hey, Joe can only manage licenses for people in engineering. There's no way to divvy that stuff up by line of business, department, whatever you might be doing. OU even, maybe in the past. And then when you do figure out and train somebody up on licensing, there's no control over the visibility, so they see everything. So that list might be 30 or 40 items long when you may only have 5 that are active licenses that you actually want to assign. That just adds to the confusion and complexity. Microsoft still is recommending scripting to people who are looking to improve license management, or they'll push you up to Azure level 3 or 2, I can't remember which it is, where they have GBL, which is the group-based licensing for Azure. But you're adding $24 a user on top of the 57 you're probably already paying for an E3, an ME3, or a $24 or whatever the E3s are. So suddenly your costs basically go pretty up high. But it's it works. Don't get me wrong. There's some issues around not having error correction, some delays. We do see other groups doing delegation, so I'm not going to say that nobody has delegation. They do pretty good granular delegation. They just don't do a lot of the automation pieces. So we provide, and these are things you need to look for. So even if we're not the right fit for you, these are some things that you should go out and if you're looking for other solutions or looking for a solution, there's some things you should consider. First of all, you want granular delegation, meaning I can not only assign an individual user the ability to manage licenses, I should be able to assign a grouping of users, a delegation scope. So only people in engineering or only people in, Ohio, for example, here in the States. You should be able to control the license visibility and default values. So if somebody's not that well versed in licensing, they go to create a new user, for example, you probably don't want to have all those licenses out there. You probably want to have it scoped down to only show the ones that are important to them or the ones that you want them to have. And then you want to probably find a solution that lets you have default values on the checkboxes. Hide the ones you don't want them to assign, or make them read only, and then check automatically the ones that have to be assigned, and then let them choose on the optional, make those read write. Quotas are important here if you're a large organization. So the ability to divide up the tenant by administrative groupings. So maybe by department, right? So you have 10,000 licenses in your organization, or 1,000, or whatever it might be. You might want the engineering department to only have 50 of those, or 500 of those, or whatever it might be. So you want to look for something, some solution that does license pools or license quotas. We call them quotas in our tool. There are other tools out there that have license quotas, but those will let you divvy up the licenses according to your administrative model, and allow people to manage across without across the enterprise without going over their license quota, or their maximum number of licenses for their particular line of business or business unit. Chargeback reporting should come along with that, so that people know, hey, if I have X number of licenses, how many are assigned, how many of those assigned are active, meaning people are actually using the licensing, and then also how many total licenses am I committed for. Each business unit might want to know that, or department, whatever you're delegating by, or you may just want that for the total, so you can say, hey, look, I bought 10% more licenses than I need. Over the course of last year, we never used 10% of our licenses. They're sitting there idle. So look for the folks that are not active but hold a license. You want something that'll low license alert, or come up with low license alerts. By the way, that's a free option inside of Cayosoft Administrator. There's a rule that will warn you within a certain percentage of license type going to 0, or within a certain count of licenses. So if I'm within 10 licenses, alert me, or if I'm within 10%, alert me. And we have that same thing for the line of business admins as well. So if they are starting to run out of their quotas pool or whatever, alert on that. We have service or scenario specific utilities. That's pretty unique to us. We actually have a free feature in our tool that lets you pick a license and basically enable or disable a checkbox inside of each license. So oftentimes what you'll see is Microsoft will say, hey, we're going to give you a new option. They just turn it on for everybody. Yammer was one of those, right? And so people wanted to turn that off. And instead of writing a script, we have a free, what we call a rule, that you can use that lets you turn on or off individual options within licenses across all of your E5s or E3s or whatever they might be. Make sure that there's some support for hybrid. I know I've heard rumor that some of the folks out there that are selling tools like ours are starting to add hybrid support. Haven't really seen it much. And then the other thing that's probably more important than even the hybrid support is looking at change history. So over the course of time, what was the original license assigned? What was the new license assigned? What was the cost savings between that change, across the life cycle of that user? So you might find that somebody changes their job roles and they no longer need an E3 license. They are going to work from home in a web browser and they only need an F1. Well, first of all, you may not know that just because of the job role. You might have to look to see what's in the license also. We'll talk about that as well. But understanding that is a pretty big thing moving forward. Automatic assignment of licenses is important. You want something that'll let you do it by group or by attribute. Otherwise, you have to construct a bunch of extra groups that you may not want to construct. Each group obviously has to be maintained. Daily license verification. If you still are going to continue with having administrators with the ability to go in and tweak licenses, you may want a baseline that starts that process. So you might want to say, well, every user that is in this group or has this attribute has to have an E3 with these options. I don't care what happens to the other checkboxes, but don't let them mess with the E3, because that's what we're doing to enforce Office access or control data exfiltration, potential issues, etc. So you want to look for something that's going to go out, check the licenses if you do have manual license management going on. And if somebody's messing with your baseline on the particular license that you want to control, make sure it gets corrected. In our tool, it's a little extra. There's some cost modeling rules that'll let you look at, if I change from A to B license, what would the cost difference be based on my costs, not necessarily generic list prices. And then you want to make sure that no matter what happens, you have license change notification. Not just low license alert, but anytime Microsoft changes the licenses in your tenant, you want to be looking for what those changes were and what the impact might be. So be aware of that. There are some great scripts out there that will do that, and they don't really take a lot to maintain. We provide it. It's one of the free rules that we have as part of our freeware package. But the issue you really want to watch is you want to tie that to whatever, if you're doing scripts to assign licenses, you want to tie those two together, because if there's a change in licensing, you want to freeze your script so you can go back and analyze the change that Microsoft made to make sure there isn't some new conflict either between options or between licenses or between licenses and options. So you need to be a little bit careful there. Let's talk a little bit about license optimization, and then I'm going to chat real quickly about adoption, talk about a free tool that we have for driving adoption within your organization, and then we'll jump over and I'll show you a couple of kind of cool things that we do. License optimization, really, up to now, it's been sort of a wild guess approach. Inside Microsoft's reporting, inside your admin console, they give you a usage report. But you can't really get usage by user unless you do an export, and then it's up to you to figure out who's using what. And there's no costing information there, so then it's this huge mathematical exercise in Excel to try and figure out, okay, who could switch based on their usage, what's the cost, and oh, by the way, that's not enough to really determine if they can switch. So it's kind of the wild guess approach. There's another company out there that claims that they do license optimization, but all they do is show you what pieces are being used a little bit better than Microsoft does. Microsoft only shows by service, so what percentage of users are using Exchange, for example. One of our competitors out there actually will say Joe is using Exchange, but not Yammer. But again, that's not enough to optimize the license because it doesn't give you the detail needed to actually figure out what the optimal license to jump to is. So you get some reporting on usage, but you don't actually get any ability to do optimization. So I am going to brag a little bit about this. From the knowledge that we've gained over the last several years, we have come up with an analytics model for the entire Microsoft licensing scheme. And we use service metrics, meaning usage data that we were describing earlier. Usage metrics on each service. We use service metrics based on a user by user basis. So we go off and we look at not only what are they using, but what's the current status of the license? How much mail is in the mailbox? Are they using facial recognition? All those other things that come along with various licenses. And we know which license has those options and which ones don't, to give you a better approach to trying to figure out, could I downgrade this person? Because it could be one option in an E5 that prevents them from going to an E1, right? Maybe you can work around those. And then we look at the interdependent options and what we call bundles, and we give you some insight into that. So it may be that you have one license today that's an E5, but you could go to an E1 if you added an archive license. And it's half as much, but they're getting the same effective service to the end user. So in addition to looking at that data, we provide details on what is required to move to a lower license. We include options to analyze licenses that aren't actually in your tenant too. So for example, if you don't have any E1s or F1s, that's okay. We're still gonna show you, hey, by the way, you could downgrade to this, even though you don't necessarily have those in your tenant. It would be up to you to go out and get those. That E-level license going down to an E1 with an archive is a good example, right? You may not have any archive or E1 licenses, but we'll still give you that option to look at it. And we're going to give you the minimum or the lowest level license plus all those in between. So if it's really hard to get to an E1 from somebody that's got an ME5, for example. So 57 down to $4, right? It's really difficult. We're going to know that. So it may be simpler to go from an E5 to an ME5 to an E5, or an E5 to an E3. But eventually, if you worked really hard at it, you might get them down to an E1, right? So we don't expect people are going to go to that much effort because there's probably reasons in there, but we give you that sort of complexity visibility there as well. And again, we don't just do the licenses you own, we also do them against other license types that are out there. We have certain ones that we support and certain ones we don't, but we'll show you how you can determine that. And then finally, you may not be ready to optimize your licenses. You just want to know, how much could I be saving? Because when I have my renegotiation on my EA with Microsoft, or when I go to plan what I'm going to buy next year or drop this month or add this month, I want that information in front of me, and information is power. And so for us, generating a report that shows you that optimization detail is almost as important as actually showing you the advisory service that actually shows you how you can get to a certain license. Free software. Everybody loves free software. Sometimes companies have a hard time because it may not be supported, but this is certainly a good opportunity I wanted to mention. Go to cayosoft.com/free. It'll give you details on some of the things that you can get out of Cayosoft Administrator. First of all of our reporting and analytics reports are all for free. We don't charge for those. You can download and start using those today. We have some great Office 365 and on-premise Active Directory and Exchange on-premise and Exchange Online reports. We do provide Active Directory management at no charge. So if you're just needing a GUI for Active Directory management, we have that free for anyone to use. So, even if you're working for a charity or something, they could use that just to manage AD. It doesn't do hybrid, it doesn't do Exchange, but it does definitely give you a web portal for on-premise AD management. And then we also offer our Office 365 adoption dashboard, which goes user by user to show you what each individual user is using, their current license, current cost, and then you can adjust the license there if you like, or you can send that person an email saying, hey, by the way, I see you're not really using OneDrive yet. Our corporate standard is OneDrive. Here's a brief tutorial on how you can use OneDrive, and you can really start to have people receive proactive training to get through getting more out of the licenses you're already paying for. I think that's a great opportunity for people, and we offer that as part of our free package. You do have to let the system collect. Depending on the size of your environment, might take 10 minutes, might take an hour. But once the data is collected, you'll get this nice dashboard, and you can go user by user. That can also be delegated, right? So if you have administrators, you want Joe to look at the people just in engineering, or Kelly or whoever, you can delegate that down. They can only see the users they're responsible for, and we do give you a bunch of extra filters so you can filter on custom attributes, all sorts of crazy stuff. All right, let's jump over to my VM. I'm going to show you three really quick things here. Excuse me. Just before we started, I created a brand new user. I'm looking at the Cayosoft Administrator web portal, by the way, if you're wondering what this crazy thing is. Cayosoft sort of gives it away. If you're a customer, I saw we had a couple customers, thanks for attending. You can also change that if you weren't aware of that. You can put in your own brand there. But I just created, right before we started, a new account called Frank Jones. Then I went and selected Frank Jones, and let's just come out and take a look at the license that Frank has. So license here under Active Directory. So I just went in and searched for Active Directory user Frank Jones. Frank's was provisioned through our system. We'll see what happened there. Part of that provisioning was actually assigning a license, and you'll see that out of all these different crazy plans that I have out here, I just gave Frank a generic E3, and I have 10 out of the 25 in my tenant. It's a pretty small tenant. I have 25 E3 licenses, a couple of the E5s out there, etc. But you'll see that I'm seeing all of these ugly licenses like this Skype for Business, PSTN consumption, weird, I don't know what that is. But it gives us really too much. I probably don't want that type of detail. So what I can do is if I've set this user up properly, which I know I haven't, so we're going to do a quick demo how to update users. I can actually assign delegation of that user to a lower level admin who may just be managing people, for example, in Columbus engineering. So let's go take a quick peek. When I provision that user, you'll see that it created the user on premise, enabled an on-premise remote mailbox, set settings on the remote mailbox on premise, created the office account, assigned the license, set my mailbox settings, regional settings, enabled remote mailbox for archive if needed, and then configured some client access settings on the mailbox. All of that was done by me just simply clicking new user and providing a first name and a last name. And I just literally clicked remote, license options. And again, I had all this huge number of licenses out there, et cetera. But when I went through that process, I got a user really quickly and everything was configured and ready to go and the license was assigned. So just to sort of see what happened there, we have this thing called change history. It's not effective yet. I have to wait a couple more minutes for it to take effective. We'll show you that here in a minute when we make changes to this user. So let's come into the properties for that user. And let's go to the organization tab. And we'll see that he's not assigned a department because I kind of skipped that. So now he's in engineering. And let's change the manager to Albert Einstein. So now I've updated that individual, pretty simple. There they go, another operation completed successfully, good. So let's take a look at what happens if I'm a delegated administrator and the differences that I see when things are controlled, right? This is what I would consider an uncontrolled situation. I can see all the commands on the right, I can see pretty much any property, etc. So instead of going straight into Active Directory, let's go into Columbus and let's take a look at my 80 users here in Columbus. Let's do a search, see if I have Frank Jones. Frank Jones is not in Columbus, so I'll just create another whole new user here just to show you the differences. So we'll go ahead and create a new Frank. This time it's in the users OU, so we'll say Frank Smith. Pretty cool. Everything else is automatically created for me. I can choose suffix if that's necessary. Don't really have to at this point. I'm going to choose Exchange Remote. Choose my license options. Wow, much different view. Much different view. So what we've now done is we've allowed them to see the E1, business apps, E5, and E3. We didn't sort them, but you could. But the idea is that we got rid of all those licenses that they really don't need. So if this is a help desk ticket that I'm servicing, I might only know, I might only have 4 options on that ServiceNow ticket or whatever help desk system you're using. And so I can come in now and pick the one that I'm thinking is important. And you'll also notice that now instead of 25 E3 licenses, I have a maximum of 12. I have 1 of 12 remaining. And that's because Columbus is under quota, right? I'm under quota by 1. So when I select that license and assign it, now I'm going to decrement my quota. I'll have 0 of 12. So the idea is that I've limited the Columbus administrators. First of all, I don't show them everything because it's too much for them, and I'm limiting how many licenses they can assign. So I've divided up that tenant licensing infrastructure. So we'll say next. I'm not worried about the password. I'm going to let it auto-generate. Well, actually, let's go ahead and just put one in here. Make sure it's nice and complex. Nice description there. Created when. Job title. Office is filled in, engineering's filled in, everything's filled in. We'll give them an employee number. Full-time employee, great, next. What type of access level does he have? These are not attributes that are in Active Directory and Office. These are what we call virtual attributes. I don't really need to set any of those right now. I'm gonna go ahead and just create that user and we'll let that percolate for a minute. Now it's going off and doing its tricks and running some automations in the background to get that user established. I think it was Frank. So we'll now search, see if the Active Directory user is done. Yeah, okay, so the engineering user, Frank Smith, is created on premise. I don't know if it's created yet in Office because I haven't been notified that it's finished. All right, so I have to wait a couple minutes here. So while that's percolating, let's talk about some additional things that can be done. So in addition to controlling manual license administration and also automating that, Cayosoft Administrator also has a full set of automation rules for licensing and for quota management. So since we just saw manual assignments and that kind of dealt with quotas, let's go take a look at licensing quotas. So this is a screen that gives me where I have my quotas assigned and tells me exactly sort of what the status is on those quotas. And so for Columbus, my total cost for licensing is $710 a month. I've assigned $420 of that, right? Because we want to know what's assigned versus not assigned. Unassigned cost, total average cost. I haven't provided all of these things, so far I don't have that yet. I gave them a quota limit of 12 E3s, 12 E5s, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now let's drill down a little bit more and see some additional detail that we have. So I'm hiding licenses with no quotas. That's the columns. You can also add or hide the different pieces of information. I can export to a CSV, or I can actually jump down to the individual quota and sort of take a quick peek at how that's configured. So this jumped me to the Columbus admin unit, and I'm now looking at my quota detail right here. So this is showing me on a case-by-case basis where my quota resides. So I have quota limit of 12, I've assigned 12, I have 0 remaining. Now, when it hits this, there's a periodic report that will be sent to whoever's listed down here on this quota notification contacts list, plus the administrator who's listed as part of those admins that are on our sort of default or generic notification list. So I'm going to get a report as the senior Uber administrator of all the different quota groups and their current standings. But when that report goes out to this individual Columbus admin unit, only Albert Einstein, or when Albert Einstein sees that, he'll only see the Columbus one. So the reports are self-tailoring to only give me quota information. It's basically this detailed information, but we add some color there. So if they're at quota, it says, hey, you're out of licenses. It shows the number in red. Otherwise, it's in green if they have quota remaining, et cetera. And so that gives me very tight control over, first of all, costs if they're assigned. Maybe a department buys their own licenses. I can put the costing in there. Also, I can now say, just enforce these. Don't let them go past the 12. Or I can just say, just report when they go past. And then I'll know I need to buy more licenses for them. Don't interrupt the process. We'll just need to know so we can get some more licenses, right? So let them go past their quota. It'll lead into the total tenant quota limit or total tenant limit, but that's okay in the short term. Or I can just say report assigned only. So when I'm first starting this out, I might not know how many people have. I can assign a generic quota based on whatever I think is appropriate and let it run the reports or manually run the reports and see exactly how far off we are. Get those people licensed up properly, adjust the quota limits, then start enforcing, right? So it can be a process there, a project process. All right, so let's talk a little bit about automation rules. So we do have automation rules, and so I'll just go pick one here. Here is one that uses an Active Directory, a group, and for this group, engineers assigns a license. This one's actually not an active rule. I'm not actually using it, but the idea is that you're allowed to pick any group. We do this for office groups as well. You can apply it to everybody in that group or just the unlicensed one. So it could be for provisioning new licenses to users. And if the office user is disabled, remember we're doing a hybrid lookup here. If that user is disabled in office, maybe we don't want to assign the license, just ignore that guy. But a couple of other important things here. We have this tied into our change notification. So for example, if my plan is everyone in engineering gets an E5, and then I come in here and say, well, I don't want all the check boxes. Maybe I only want, I don't want search, none of these issues, none of this stuff. Yeah, I want information protection, not standard. I don't know what I'm going to want and not want. I have to pick and choose these from my knowledge of what that E5 is going to be. But the idea is that this becomes my baseline. So when I go to run this rule, it'll not only assign everybody in that group this particular license. When I rerun the rule, maybe every hour, if somebody goes in and manually changes these, it'll fix the license. It'll correct the license. So that's why we call these enforced licenses, license rules, not just licensing assignment rules, because it'll actually periodically examine the license and reinforce whatever your baseline is. I may not want to touch any of these others, so I would mark all the other licenses as ignore, right? So I don't need to monkey around with any of these others, so I just mark them all as ignore. That way I'm only messing around with engineering people in this group and this E5 license. Anybody who doesn't have an E5 license is going to get one in this group. And if I have them all marked as ignore, I could potentially get an error if they already have an E3, for example. So if, for example, somebody in the engineering group has an E3, I definitely want to revoke that and assign the E5, because all engineers get the ME5, right? The $57 big license, so that they can access whatever they need to do, and they're fully protected. So you have to understand a little bit of how licensing works, but these things now will run every day. We also have the ability, if there's some weird situation with your licensing, we can introduce some scripting there to take advantage of or to overcome certain limitations. I don't know of any customer except for one that's using that, and that's a real specific situation. I may have a group that I want to exclude from the engineers, so maybe engineering managers don't get an E5, they get an E3. I could say exclude the engineering managers and then have a different rule that manages them, so we do these cascaded relational groups. I can also pause this rule or stop this rule if license change has been detected. So if a licensing change, we notice that at night, we would pause all these rules until you go back in and say, okay, this is correct. You correct your licensing and off you go. You'll first have the opportunity then to understand the change in licensing. We just really don't want to have any outages or data loss. So we provide that as one of those fail-safe features. Here's a different one that goes directly after users based on attributes. It's the same list down below. And we maintain the friendly names, so you don't have to worry about trying to figure out what license is which. And then you can go directly to Office and do direct Office licensing. So we provide hybrid users groups and attributes, or you can go direct to Office and do it that way, whichever floats your boat. All right, so let's talk a little bit about analytics. Now that we talked about quotas and rules, let's jump back over to our web portal. So in addition to giving you that dashboard, that free dashboard for service adoption, we now in Cayosoft Administrator, all our existing customers are going to get this new one, which is called License Optimization. And this dashboard at first glance looks familiar, looks similar to the license adoption, but this one's all about understanding how I can move users to a lower level license to optimize that user's experience and the spend on that license based on what they actually need and what parameters on the or statistics we've gathered on the actual usage of their existing license. So at the top, it tells me what my total spend is. By the way, I can actually also delegate this down to, for example, my Columbus admin, right? So I might have somebody in Columbus that just wants to do this for Columbus. So I can actually grant them the ability to use this, but just for Columbus. So when they come in and see dashboards, whatever admin units that I've assigned them, they'll actually be able to use. But they won't be able to do it for anybody that they're not assigned or delegated. So again, we divvy that up to make it usable. We also have different licensing models. In 6.4, we won't allow you to adjust those. It's going to come out of the box with the E-level licenses, the M-level and E-level licenses. But then later on, you can use this for other types of licenses. You can tweak it. That'll be early next year, early in 2020. But it shows me out of all my total spend, how much has been assigned, what's unassigned, and what my potential savings are on a monthly basis or yearly basis, and cost savings. So about half of my assigned licenses, 50%, I could probably save by downgrading these licenses. Well, how do I know that? It's, again, usage data is not enough. So I'm just going to hit search. It's going to bring back all the users that have licenses. And you'll see here's my user that we've analyzed. Here's their current license, current cost savings we would project could be done. And it turns out we're not going to save you anything on this because this user's already optimized. So to understand what we looked at, we have something called the Optimization Advisor. And when you select that, it brings up a dot. Oh, this one actually it wasn't even looked at yet. Interesting. So let's take a look at this guy. It must be a new user that I added earlier. Let's take a look at this guy, not optimized. Okay, so here's a better example. So this user we looked at, oh, I think I know what it is. No, I don't have any clue on that case. This particular user, we looked at their current license. We realized that going from E1 to E3, there's a 93% confidence level that we can do that. There's also a 73% confidence level you could just revoke the license, and a 98% confidence level you could take them to an E3. So on the E3 model, I'm looking at what potentially could hang me up. So we not only looked at the usage, but now we actually analyzed all the options and the status of each license option to determine whether we can move them. So let's look at this one around exchange mailbox size. This is pretty simple and self-explanatory. E3 gives them 100 gigs. They're currently using 32, so they can definitely fit their existing mailbox into that license. They are assigned Power BI Pro. We're not exactly sure if they're using that. There's a little note here. This user has Power BI Pro plan assignment that will be lower or unavailable if they go to the next lower level license. You could actually use a Power BI free license. You get the same features as Pro, except for those two distribution and collaboration functionality. So if they're not using distribution and collaboration, you could downgrade them to E3, no problem. Here's another one. They're using Stream E5. What's that note? Current Stream E5 provides face detection, right? So if you're assigned that license, you get face detection. They won't be available for facial recognition if you drop down to an E3. But who in the heck is using that? I don't know. Maybe you guys are. We're certainly not. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say that. And then we have all the other things that we looked at. And then we also looked at the user activity to see when they logged in or when they didn't log in. So the revoke scenario, 73%, it looks like they would basically lose the data, but it would probably be based on user activity, and all the activity threshold, probably not a good candidate here. That's why it's only 73% confidence. Actually, in our model that we're releasing in December, this will be like a 20% confidence because we see recent usage, right? So you can't just revoke the license entirely. In this case, because I know I can go comfortably to an E3 from whatever they're on E5, I could just apply the license, and it's now going to reset that license for me. If that user, for example, was one of those things that we were going to, it hasn't up refreshed. Oh, moved them in the list, sorry. If that user was one that I saw was inactive and I revoked the license, we also provided suspend there. So here's a different one. This one is not optimized, but they're saying E3 to E1. And if I look at this one, it's ready to go. It's all green lights. I could just apply the license and be done with it. It may be less likely, though, I could revoke because there is usage probably on, yeah, there's usage on Team SharePoint in the mailbox pretty recently. So, but the idea is we're giving you enough data now to go out and look. Some of these things we can't literally just tell you to do or can't really give you a great answer on. For example, if they're on an E3 and they have too much mail in the mailbox, then going to an E1 may be not an option. Even if they're not using anything else, going to E1 might require that you not only assign an E1 but an archive license. It's still cheaper, but you may have to teach the user how to use the archive mailbox. Another example that we often hear about or see is going from an E3 to an F1, where the user might have installed Office because they had it with E3. In that case, you'd have to canvass the user and ask them, hey, are you really using Office? In particular, are you using Outlook? Because an E3 with no activity except for email, but they've installed Office, is a high indicator that they probably are using Outlook, the FAT client, and that may require them to not go to an F1, but may require them to stay on the E3 or buy an Outlook license with the E1. It might still be cheaper. And I think Outlook download may be free now. I can't remember how they did that, but not sure if there's a free option still out there for Outlook or not. But those are types of things that you'd have to discuss either with the person's manager or with the individual themselves. We do plan in early next year to provide a survey capability so you can actually ask the user directly. and then based on their answers, determine whether that license change is viable or not. And again, default all admin units, I can look at billing by year or quarterly, and then I can also look by individual grouping within my admin units. With that said, that's it pretty much for the demos today. If there are any questions, we're happy to take those now. If not, we can, I think, wrap things up. Justin, you want to walk us out?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Bob. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you are interested in seeing how Cayosoft can benefit your organization or you have questions, feel free to contact us. We do offer a free trial for you. You can gain access to that on our site, or you can reach out to us to gain access to that as well. I also want to mention that we offer proof of concepts for any of you that are actively looking for a third-party solution. So feel free to visit these pages on our site, message us, and with that, again, thanks for attending, and we hope you have a great day.